recording as well. I'm just waiting for the stream to connect. Okay, there we go. Let's wait a few seconds. All right, there's some people there. All right, hello. Yeah, thanks for dropping by. My name's Ian. I'm the creator of Mars First Logistics. Yeah, so this is a game that's in early access, as you're probably aware. And I've been working on a fairly big change to the game over the last month or so. And I wanted to talk a bit more about that change because it's a fairly fundamental change to the way the editor works and also the physics in the game. And I found it a particularly challenging change to do, both technically and design-wise, but also just I've been having a lot of kind of a bit of self-doubt about whether this is the right sort of direction for the game. But I think overall I feel like it's a good change, and I think you'll enjoy the change. I think it opens up a lot of new creative possibilities, but there are some unresolved issues and things that need a bit more work. So I kind of wanted to just go through what the change is and just sort of give you a kind of bit of insight into why I made the change, and also get your feedback and questions and ideas. I mean, after all, the game is in early access, so I think if I'm going to make sort of changes like this to the game, then now's the time to do it. So what I'll be doing after the stream, I'll be putting the change into the beta branch on Steam, and so then you can try it out and let me know what you think. But I won't put it into the main branch of the game just yet. I first want to get your feedback. Anyway, so let's sort of go into what the change is. So this is what I'm going to first do is I'm going to just talk about how the building works in the old version of the game. Oh, hello. So so if you have any questions during the stream or comments, feel free to use the Twitch chat or also the Discord, the official Discord. You can post in the MFL General channel, and I've got both those windows, so I'll answer your questions as they come up. Someone asked, am I the only dev? No, I'm the main programmer and the original creator of the game, but I also work with a 3D artist and animator, Clonica Quigley, and a musician, Dan Golding, and some sound designers, Mark and Byron from Fuligen. And so that's the sort of core team. But I'm the kind of main programmer and designer on the game. Someone's asking about co-op. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about co-op just yet. The stream's not about co-op. So, all right. So let me dive in. So what I want to talk about is the way the building works in the game at the moment. So if you've played the game, you're probably familiar with it. You can sort of snap bits together. But a thing that maybe a lot of people don't sort of at first at least understand about the way this building works is that if you have a close look at the parts, So for example, this telescopic cylinder, you can see that there's a little prong that kind of pokes out of the one end, right? And that each part, if you have a look at each part, each part's got exactly one of those little prongs sticking out of it, right? And that's how that part connects to the rest of the vehicle. So a part might just have a prong. So this claw has only got one little prong there. But something like this telescopic cylinder has got a prong, and then it's also got a socket on the other end, right? So when you connect a part, say this connector, to the vehicle, its prong will go into exactly one socket, right? So sort of the little slots in the vehicle. So you can actually see the prong kind of sticking out the bottom there, just under my mouse cursor, right? And so this system has a lot of implications for the game works, right? So the reason it was done like this is that it simplifies a lot of things, right? It means it simplifies the way the physics works. And it also simplifies the user interface, right? Because you can never join things up in a loop, right? Because any new part that I add can only connect to the vehicle in one place, right? So if I build something like this, right? These don't connect, right? Because they don't have the little prongs, right? There's no prong for them to connect, right? And that's deliberate. So this little gap here is very deliberate to show that these are not connecting, right? And that's because there's no mechanical join between those two parts. And that's kind of useful to know, right? For example, in situations like this, so here, if I put a block here, it makes a difference whether I connect it to this one or this one, right? So if I connect it to this one, there's no physical connection between these two blocks over here, right? So that means that I can move this motor freely, right? Whereas if those two were physically connected, then this servo wouldn't be able to move, right? And so this visual gap is deliberately put there to show that there's no physical connection there. But so that's the reason that it was initially designed like this. And it simplifies a lot of things, like, for example, sort of selecting stuff. Because you can never have loops, you know, if you select this, I know immediately what is going to become disconnected from the vehicle when you delete this, right? Because there's no other way for these parts up here to be connected to the vehicle. That's the only way they can be connected to the vehicle, because there's no way for them to loop back to connect some other way, right? So I know that when you select this, I can just delete all these other parts as well, because they're going to become disconnected. So it simplifies, and you know, I can use the same idea for copying, right? So you can just select that and it'll copy everything that's going to become disconnected from the vehicle. So that's so that was the reason that it was made like that, right? But what I found, like, during early access, is that a lot of people, it's quite hard to communicate, and I don't think the game does. I mean, the game tries to communicate it, but I think it's quite hard to communicate how that's the way that the system works, right? That each part does have a prong that connects to a socket, right? And that this kind of gap that you sometimes get is very deliberate, right? It's supposed to be there. Because I get a lot of feedback saying, oh, you know, I wanted to connect these things up and I can't. There's a gap here. Why is there a gap here, right? Or another question I get a lot is, I would like to be able to connect things a different way, right? So I have this thing, but I would like to connect it instead of this way. I would like this top bit to be connected to the vehicle. I'd like to swap it around. That's a common question with servos, right? I would like to flip the servo over so that they can go like this, right? Instead of both going different ways. So let me just demonstrate. So so because these servos, so let me put them on the same channel. Because these servos are both going in the same direction, they're both going to move in the same direction, right? So it's harder to create something that sort of clamps. And it would be nice if you could just sort of flip this around, but you can't because the prong on the servo is only on the one side, right? So you can't flip it around. It doesn't make sense with the way this building system works. So let me just see if there's any more questions. What is that thumping? Is there some thumping? Maybe I'm bumping the table. I don't know what that thumping is. I'll try and, it might just be me bumping the table, or it might be my computer, I don't know. Let me know if it's an issue. So there's a couple of ways to kind of address the issues that people have with the system about not understanding how it works. So one of them is to just leave it as it is, right? It's not like the game is still good. People still enjoy it. It's got 97% positive, overwhelmingly positive on Steam. People obviously still enjoy the game and still get a lot out of it, right? So I could just leave it as it is. I think that would be a fine option. Another option would be try and explain better how the system actually works and why it is like it is in the game. So, maybe in the tutorial, add more steps to the tutorial to try and convey that this is why the game is like it is, and maybe people sort of understand how it works. And then the other option is, which I was kind of hesitant to pursue, is maybe I should change the game to make it work a bit more like how people expect it to work. And maybe I should allow you to, if you want to connect these things together, I should allow you to do that, right? And then deal with all the kind of consequences of that. So I decided to give that third option a go, and I ended up going down a bit of a rabbit hole because it has a lot of implications for the editor and the physics. But I think I ended up with a pretty good, I think overall it's a good change. I think it's going to open up a lot more creative possibilities. But there are some negatives, so it will potentially break some existing builds, although it shouldn't be too hard to fix them. There's some areas that still need a bit of work. So what I'll do now, actually I wanted to show you another example of why you might want to make a mechanical loop. So something simple like, let's say I wanted to have like a kind of two layers to this vehicle, and the top layer was supported by springs, right? So I might sort of put 4 springs, and then I want to have another layer on top like this, and I want to have that layer supported by these springs, right? So I can't really do that at the moment because there's little gaps, right? It doesn't matter, I could maybe connect the spring like this, but then I'm going to have a gap down the bottom here. So there isn't really a way to connect this, right? So when you're driving around, actually I'll put something just to raise these up. So if I try and separate this, you can see that the springs, you see, only one spring is actually connected to that, right? So these other springs are not actually supporting that, are not connected to that top layer, right? So that's just a simple example of like something that I think players might find a bit confusing and counterintuitive, and something that they might want to do, something you might want to do in the game that you can't currently do, right? Okay, I'll try and, so apparently it's going to bump the table. I'll try not to bump the table. My microphone is on the table, so maybe that's why. Yeah, so someone's saying that they tried this exact scenario and it annoyed them. It might be my keyboard as well. It's a bit clicky. Okay, so let's see now what this looks like. So that was the old version of the game. So I'm going to close it and I'm going to open the new version. So this isn't released yet, but I'm going to put it onto beta at the end of this stream. So it's pretty much ready to go. So that's the same vehicle, right, that I just made in the other game, but now it's working as you might expect, right? Everything's connected and it's all looped together, right? So what's the big change? Why does this work now? Okay, so let me just check my notes here. Just want to. Yeah, I covered everything. Okay, so yeah, so one of the big my biggest priority with this change was I wanted to keep I wanted to allow this sort of more creative freedom and allow you to build more things, but I wanted to keep the user interface as simple and intuitive as it was before, right? So I didn't want to make sort of big changes to how the user interface works. And I think I've sort of mostly achieved that. So the big change now is that parts do not have a prong anymore, right? It's just sockets, right? So everything's a socket. And any socket, so there's no more sort of prongs that stick out that go into sockets. Everything's just a socket, and any socket can connect to any other socket, right? So maybe it's not sort of as physically realistic, right? But it's a bit more kind of what you might expect from a video game. For example, in Minecraft, you can just stick blocks together. There's no kind of mechanical linkage. But I mean, obviously you could imagine some sort of mechanical kind of thing going on there that connects them. Maybe they're magnetic or something, I don't know. But yeah, so now sockets connect to any other socket. So when you build something like this, there's not going to be any more gaps, right? So if I were to kind of make a little loop here, and I connect this up, then everything connects and there's no more gaps, right? And so these are now mechanical linkages, right? So as you can see with the springs, right? So they're all connected. So there's no need for that visual gap, because the point of the visual gap before was to sort of show that there's no actual mechanical connection, right? Now, obviously, this is going to mean that certain things that worked before are not going to work anymore. So, for example, before you could do this, like I showed before, and I'm connecting this block to that servo, but now when I connect that block to the servo, it's also connected to this block, right? So if I try and move this servo, it's stuck, right? It's not going to move because it's, both these blocks on both sides are rigid. So there's a few more parts that I've added to sort of, you have to be a bit more careful about sort of what connections you make. So you might want to use a 90-degree bend for that instead, right? So that it doesn't connect to this other part. So these are a few sort of non-backward compatible changes, right? So you might have a build that sort of utilizes, that has those kind of, has something like that. And now in the new version of the game, there's going to be actually mechanical linkages between parts that weren't there before. And so things might not be able to move. But they should be relatively easy to fix, I think. So let's sort of like look at some other sort of things. What else can we do with this system, right? So you can do all sorts of things. There's quite a lot of things you can do, right? So I kind of let me show you. So you might want to build some sort of weird type of suspension, right? So so you could sort of build this kind of weird diamond suspension. And now these connect in a loop, right? So now I can put a wheel over here, and I can copy and paste stuff like I could before. So I can copy with C, and I can go and and I can rotate. This here. C. Oops. All right, so now you can sort of build something like this, and yeah, it's all connected up, and it all works, right, as you would expect it to. And you couldn't do this before in the previous version of the game. Another thing you can do is, which is pretty handy, is you can just flip servos over, right? So, actually, I'll get to that in a second. Sorry, I missed out something. So yeah, so you can you can also do things like, so before, another thing that people often asked was they would like to, they maybe had some long arm or something and they wanted to lift something really heavy up, and the servo, say they were trying to use a servo to do it, it wasn't powerful enough, and they wanted to use two servos. But because you can't sort of link things together in the old version of the game, you couldn't really combine the power of two servos. But now you can, because so for example, something like this, right? So here I've got one servo and I've got another servo, and they're both acting at the same time to lift this long arm, right? So I've put them on the same channel. So now you can sort of combine multiple servos to create more powerful arms and things to lift things up. So that's another use case. Let me just catch up on the chat quickly. Okay, someone's saying thumping's mostly stopped. I think it is me just hitting the desk. I'm just getting a bit excited. I have to be aware of that. There's someone saying they can see the practical use of the rounded tube parts now. Yes. Maze says hi. Hi, Maze. Thanks for joining the stream. So because now, okay, so I was talking about sort of how existing builds might break. So let me just go through how you might sort of fix up an existing build. So one of my builds that's actually on the workshop is this one here called the butterfly catcher. So this I made as a kind of a way to catch the butterfly in the game. So if you don't know there's a butterfly you have to catch later in the game. And it's a sort of a lid that opens and closes, right? But this doesn't work anymore, right, since the update, because there's this servo over here, and that's supposed to open this big cage. But you can see, if I just delete these wheels, you can see the cage is actually connected now to the bottom. So what I need to do is I need to replace these with parts that make it not connect. And one of the consequences of the new system is that when you're selecting things, it's now a bit harder to work out which parts are going to get disconnected from the vehicle when you delete something. So for example, let's say I have like something like this, right? Right, I have that over there. So now if I delete that, the game can tell that this is all going to get deleted, right? So it highlights it in blue. So if I delete it, all of that goes, right? But if I have this connecting back, right, which now you can do, if I highlight this, the game knows that when I delete this, it's still going to be connected back to the vehicle with this one. So it doesn't highlight the rest of these. So if I delete this now, it's not going to delete the rest of that, right? So that can make deleting a little bit harder, right? Or a little bit more clicks, right? So same with this one. If I delete that one, obviously it's still connected to the vehicle with that one. So to delete this whole thing, what I have to do now is I have to delete this one, and then it will be disconnected, right? But that's kind of, I think that's not like, it's sort of, you can see it as a downside, but it's actually kind of quite useful in a lot of ways, because it means, because, for example, this part here, if I were to delete this part, all these other parts are still connected to the vehicle, right? So I can just delete that part without deleting a whole bunch of other things. And then I can replace it with, say, this one. I can replace this one with this part. So this is a new part, this T connector. So I've got a few new parts in here to deal with kind of situations like this. So that's connected to there, that's connected to there. This needs to be deleted as well because, oh wait, no, this needs to be deleted, I think. Yeah, and these need to be deleted as well. So I've got connectors for those. And then I think that's everything. So now it can open, right? Because those parts that I've replaced were basically fixing that lid to the bottom, right? And so the motor couldn't move it up. But once you've sort of replaced those with parts that don't make those connections, it'll work, right? So you might encounter sort of problems like this with your old builds where things are not moving where they used to, and that's probably because there's now new connections being made, right? So someone just saying in the chat, in the Discord, very much like the actuator combining, being able to pre-set up actuator. Yeah, okay. So I know that's another thing people want, is they want to be able to preset where the different parts are, but that's not this change. Yeah. So that's another common question, is like being able to sort of set the starting point of servos and things. So that's not what I'm addressing in this particular change. It's something I might look at some point, but not right now. Okay, so and then the other thing, so because a socket can now connect to any other socket, it means that it also makes sense, like there's no special kind of prong now which each part has, right? So it makes sense to be able to want to select a different socket on the part you're attaching to connect it by, right? So what you can do now is, let's say I wanted to connect this on its side. You can use, on the keyboard, you can use W and S to flip between different pivot points, right? So you can flip which pivot point it's using to connect, right? And that's something that you couldn't do before. So that opens up a lot of cool things, right? So for now, you can take a servo and you can just flip it, right? And so that makes it much easier to make things that, put these on the same channel, that, you know, do this, for example, right? So if you want things sort of going in opposing directions, it's much easier. You can just flip one of the motors, right? And so what I've done is I've kind of run with that idea, and I've added, for a lot of the parts, I've added new pivot points, right, to them. So, so for example, let me just check my notes here. So for example, the jaw now has multiple pivot points, right? So so you can sort of connect it like you could before, but you can also connect it like that, right? Or on any of these sides, which is something that you couldn't do before, right? It didn't make sense before because there was only one prong that could connect to the vehicle. But now, because any socket can connect to the vehicle, you can flip between them. I've also added so the wedge now has new pivot points. The horn has new pivot points, so you can actually that's not. I mean, you can stack the horns, although that's not really. That was just something I added in. So, for example, the wedge has new pivot points, so you can now flip the wedge and use it as a kind of a splitter, right? So you can sort of do things like that, which you couldn't do before. What was the other one? Keep on losing my spot. Oh, the cone. That's a good one. So the cone is now much more flexible, right? So actually, so now you can connect the cone in lots of different ways, right? So there's all these different pivot points that you can connect the cone with now, right? So you can do things like this, right? So you can, and then say I want to finish that off, I can put a cone on the end like that. So so there's lots of different, and I can even do that, right? So lots of different kind of creative possibilities now, right? So maybe I want to put some rockets on there. Oops. Right, so you couldn't build something like that before because you couldn't sort of just connect any socket to any other socket. What else? So the wedges are now much easier. Not the wedges, the curve bits are much easier to use. So before, it was only sort of one way you could connect these together, and that's why I had reversed versions of these curve bits. But now I've gotten rid of the reversed versions, and you can sort of connect them in lots of different ways, right? So so there's, you can sort of connect these in any way you want. So it just adds a lot more sort of flexibility and creative options to the building. So I think that's all really good, right? And still intuitive and easy to use. Okay, so another thing, let me just catch up on the chat quickly. So someone's saying it makes much more sense in their mind. Well, I'm glad. That's good to know, because I want us to keep it sort of intuitive. Does the really long rail slider have new pivots? No. So, but you can connect to. It had 2 pivots before, but you can connect to either one now. So before you could just connect it like that, but now you can connect it like that as well. So you can sort of have it being connected like that. I mean, maybe I should add another pivot to the end. I don't know. I have actually added some new parts too. So there's a slider part now, which is this kind of gives you a slider. It's sort of like a piston that is free sliding, right? And that can kind of, it has a few more pivot points. So this is just a free sliding part. So that, I'm not sure exactly what you might use this for, but I thought it'd be kind of cool thing to add. I think a few people have asked for this. So there's 3 different sizes of those. And so you can, you can pivot these as well. So actually, if I so you can kind of connect these in a loop, which is kind of fun. So now these make a mechanical loop, right? So now they're all fixed together, but they always, they're gonna form a loop. So you can create some quite interesting things. So I think there's going to be a lot more sort of mechanical things you can make with the game now. And yeah, I'm kind of pretty excited to see what people make in it. What was I going to say? So, okay, so another thing that I've done, some of the parts before had kind of slightly odd lengths, which meant that they couldn't be lined up with the other parts, right? So they weren't sort of the same length as the other parts, which wasn't really an issue before because you couldn't make mechanical loops, right? But now, because you can, I've adjusted the length of some of the parts. So for example, the telescopic cylinder is now exactly 1 unit, right? So you can now more easily kind of link it up with other parts, so it will fit together exactly, right? So you can link it up. So if you want to make sort of, it's more easy to kind of join things up now. So the telescoping cylinder has been adjusted, and the other parts that have been adjusted are the hinge and the ball joint. So the hinge and the ball joint are now just 1 unit long, right? So before they were kind of like 1.2 or something, kind of a weird length. So now you can sort of move them and have them form a loop, right? So now you have this mechanical loop like this. Okay. So it's much easier to sort of hook things up, which, was necessary for this new change, which wasn't really as important before. Yeah, and as I said, there's some new parts. So there's that's an old one, but there's this corner part, there's a T connector, and there's an X connector. And these are kind of all unlocked from the beginning because they're much more important now, because you want to avoid sort of building everything with just a hub, because you don't want to create accidental connections, right? So there's a bit more sort of variety of these connecting parts now. And then the other thing that I've added to the game, which is something that I should have really added a while ago, is if you have a look at the sort of the tooltip here, which is now a bit shorter as well, so it's context sensitive. So you can see, depending on what I'm hovering over, it'll give me different options. So it takes up a bit less of the screen, so that's a good thing. But you can see this is F1 help. So if you push F1, you get this, what I'm calling Engineer's Handbook, right? And this is just a sort of a bit of documentation about how to do things in the game. So the tutorial is still there, it'll still tell you things. But I feel like often, you're busy, you want to do something in the game, a tutorial message pops up, you don't really pay attention to it, you just sort of click it away. And then it's kind of gone, and you might have missed an important thing. So this is a way sort of just to put all the important information in one place. You can go and access it whenever you want. It's not just going to pop up, but whenever you feel like you want to, you're not understanding something, or you want to know how to do something, you can go into this, and you can sort of, it'll have the relevant information. So it's a work in progress. I'm still going to be adding things to this. But it's there. So it's just got some basic building stuff for now. It's got how to do copy pasting. It's got how to configure controls, and how to assign channels, what the channels mean. This sort of basic stuff that I often get questions on. That's in the tutorial, but I can sort of tell that people have missed that in the tutorial. So hopefully this sort of like helps a lot of people sort of understanding how channels work, understanding how copy pasting works, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to be sort of expanding this out. So I might sort of put a few tips and tricks in there as well. If it's something that you'd like to see in this handbook, then let me know and I'll add it in. So that's you push F1 on keyboard, and then on controller, I think it's the start button, but it'll have a prompt there. So let's talk about copy pasting, right? Because I think this is like, there are some issues with this new system that haven't quite sort of resolved. Okay, so let me just quickly catch up on the chat. So someone's saying that help is a good addition. Yeah, I agree. I should have done it a long time ago. Oh yes, long holding A and D sort of snaps. That is a good thing to add. I don't have that in the help. So if you hold down A and D, that kind of snaps to 90 degrees. If you didn't know that, let's make a note actually, because that would be a very good one to add to the tutorial. So there's all these little things that I think would be really good to kind of have documented somewhere. Yeah, so swapping a part, so that's a bit easier now, as long as the part is in some other way connected to the vehicle, right? So if you have like, you know, some sort of, well, say you have this, right? And say I want to swap this hinge for a ball joint. I can just delete it because these other parts are still connected to the vehicle in other ways. I can just delete it and replace it with something else, as long as it's the same length, right? So that sort of ability to replace parts is a bit easier now, right? Obviously, it's still going to be a problem if the parts aren't connected to the vehicle some other way. But, you know, this does make it a bit easier. But let's talk about sort of copying and pasting, right? So let's say I wanted to sort of copy this chain of hinges, right? So before, because there were no loops, you could just highlight something and it would highlight all the other parts that you know, were not connected to the vehicle, right? It would basically highlight the rest of the subassembly, and you could just copy it, right? Now that still works if a part is not connected to the rest of the vehicle, like, you know, if you have something like this and it's some long chain or whatever. So say this is some big subassembly, right? You can highlight this bit here and it will highlight everything else and you can copy it like normal, right? So that still works like it used to. But for something like this, you know, if I highlight this part, it doesn't highlight everything else, because how does it know what to highlight, right? It doesn't have any sort of like, it doesn't know that you mean to select this bit, right? Because that's connected to the rest of the vehicle. So what I've done is, if you hold down Control, you can sort of expand the selection, right? So if you're selecting something and you hold down Control, you can expand it to select more things, right? And then while you're still holding Control, you can push C, so like Control C, right? And then that will select that whole subassembly. So now you can sort of copy and paste that thing, right? Well, delete that. And you can sort of do stuff like that, right? So that's great, okay. It can be a bit fiddly though, so that was quite a small example. But if you have something like that's you know, a lot more complicated, you know, maybe it's like sort of got a bit of depth to it or something. You know, maybe there's bits inside, something like this, right? Sort of selecting this whole thing. Okay, well, you can just select that one. Okay, so that's a bad example. But let's say it's like kind of, you know, connected to the vehicle like this, right? So say I want to select this sort of chunk here, right? It's a bit fiddly, right? Because I can hold down Control, I've got to select these. Okay, well, that wasn't too bad, but you know, say this bit here is also connected to the rest of the vehicle, right? So So say that's connected to the rest of the vehicle like that now. So now, sort of selecting all of this, I've got to sort of go and select all of these bits and then make sure I get these ones over there. And then there might be bits inside that I can't even select, right? You know, and then I can select this. But then it's also like, okay, now I've selected this thing, but what if it's not sort of pivoting on the thing that I want, right? And you've got like so many different pivot points now. So you can cycle between them, but it's like, it's a bit ridiculous now. Like you've got so many, it's kind of just like, you just have to cycle between them until you get to the one you want. So it's not ideal, and I'm aware of this. And so obviously there's ways you can deal with it. You know, maybe don't have so many hubs, don't use so many hubs when you're building something. That will probably help with selecting pivot points. But I think there's probably a better system for selecting a sort of chunk of pieces like this. So, you know, maybe there's sort of your whole control and it has sort of a rectangle that select things. But that's also kind of problematic because you don't want to select things behind it as well. So the way that the selection is actually a bit more nuanced than I kind of let on. So you can select something, right? And if you hold control, you can actually it will select other parts that as long as the parts that are selected it's hard to explain, which is another problem, right? So so basically the way it works is as selection is expanded, only for the parts that would become disconnected with those selected parts don't form individual islands, right? So basically, you know, so let's say, let me do a simple example to explain. So, you know, just the fact that I'm getting sort of tongue-tied is sort of telling you that this part of the change is not as intuitive as it could be, you know. So let me sort of try and explain that a bit more clearly. So let's say I have something like this. And I want to select this sort of whole thing like that, right? So I can highlight that and highlight all these. That's one way to do it. What I can also do is highlight just that one and that one, right? Because if I delete those two, then all of these other ones at the top will become disconnected too, right? So it allows you to expand that selection, right? However, if I had something like that, now if I select that and try and highlight that, it doesn't work, right? Because these other parts are connected in a different way, right? So it's not really that intuitive. So there you have to kind of go like this, and now I can go like and select that one, right? And by the way, when you're holding down control, you can also still delete things, right? So you can also sort of expand your selection and delete stuff as well. So I think there's sort of like there's some bits of the way that selecting and copying and also, you know, selecting a pivot point. So if I were to copy this whole thing like this, right, C, and now I want to kind of like, okay, let's say I want to connect it with this middle pivot point. I kind of have to kind of go through all these until I find the one that I want, right? There, okay, so now I can use the middle one. And it's a bit, you know, you can imagine if that's like a really big part with lots and lots of sockets on it, it's going to be a pain to kind of find the one you want. So I think there's probably a better system for doing that, right? But what I want to do is I want to kind of, you know, I mean, these are problems that didn't exist in the old system because you couldn't do, you know, you couldn't make loops, right? So I think overall, you know, having this ability to create loops, I think sort of it's in a sense more intuitive. You know, someone even said in the chat it's more intuitive. And it sort of allows you to you know, a lot more creative possibilities. So I think overall it's a good change, but there's a few sort of issues, usability issues, sort of that are perhaps a bit more advanced, sort of when you're copying big, you know, you're copying and pasting big sub-assemblies and trying to select the pivot points that you know, could use a bit more work. So just a little tip which might change, might not. When you're copying pasting something, the point where you end up, so this is currently, it might change, but the point where you end up is where the first pivot point is going to be. So if I were to, so let's say this is, let's make it look a bit different. I know, let's say it's 2 servos, right, or 3 servos. So if I select all this, the servo that, if I end up there and copy that, that'll be my starting pivot point, right? So if I were to do it the other way and end up there and then C, then that would be my starting pivot point. That's it's a bit subtle and kind of not really intuitive, but as a kind of a hack to kind of decide what you want your pivot point to be of something you've copied, that's the way it's done at the moment. But you know, it's not ideal. So, but what I would like to put it out there. You know, please play with it, and then, you know, if you have ideas for how to make the copy pasting better, how to make the selecting the pivot point better, I would love to hear them. I have some of my own ideas, but what I want to do is I want to kind of put it out there, let people play with it. You know, I'll work on some other things, some new changes, some different things. I kind of feel like I've sort of had my head in this for so long. I want to kind of step back from it a bit, let people use it a bit, and then kind of come back to it with fresh eyes, and you know, maybe we can like improve these parts of it. But yeah, let me just check my notes. So I think I've covered everything. Yeah, so I think I've covered sort of everything I wanted to cover. Let me just catch up on the chat quickly, see if there's any more questions. Can you just build a scaffold then? I'm not sure what you mean, but I think so. I mean, you know, you can build vehicles. You can't build buildings. You know, you can't build things in your vehicle at the moment, but maybe we'll do that at some point. I don't know. So when I'm selecting, it's just hovering, right? So you hold down Control and you just hover, not clicking. Okay, maybe it'd be better to click. You know, I'm open to sort of that as a suggestion. Okay, so someone's saying, you know, maybe XYZ keys to choose direction of rotation. So that's a kind of that's a common sort of thing that I've heard people ask. Oh, can we rotate things on different axes? But the game doesn't really work like that, because, you know, okay, here everything's at right angles, right? But you could have something which has just got, you know, a bunch of weird angles in it, right? So, you know, let's say I have something here. This is at a funny angle. This thing here is at a funny angle. This thing's at some other angle. You know, this other thing is at a funny angle. So it's like, let's say I copy this thing, right? So this thing is like, it's not like, you know, you can rotate this sort of, you know, around X, Y, and Z. You want to sort of attach it at different sort of points, right? It's not, you know, rotating this around X, Y, Z is not going to allow me to sort of use all of those attachment points, right? So it's more about selecting the pivot point, you know. You know, rotating around X, Y, and Z axes makes sense when everything's at right angles. But in this game, things don't necessarily have to be at right angles, which I think is a nice feature. I think it's cool to be able to make things at weird angles. You know, I think that opens up a lot of possibilities, so I don't want to get rid of that. But the idea that you can sort of rotate things around different axes doesn't really work for this game, right? Because things can be at angles that are not 90 degrees. You know, it works in something like Minecraft or, you know, games where things are at 90 degrees, but not for this game. Where am I don't know how streamers like can keep track of where they are in the chat. I always lose where I am. I could imagine multi-selecting the entry points to assembly, and that's what you've done. Yeah, so to a certain extent, but only when it's 2. When it becomes more than 2, then it's problematic. So people are making suggestions. I'll have a read through these suggestions. So someone's saying, it always selects the part that's not included, doesn't include the CPU. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's. I don't think that would work. Um, like sort of, you know, I might want to select sort of a part of something that's sort of quite far away from the CPU, right? And I don't think sort of centering around things around the CPU is necessarily a good idea. Um, yeah, so someone's saying they can see the selection problems, but they still think it's a good start. I agree. I think it's overall it's a very positive change. Um, I can imagine pasting parts disconnected in a first step, then clicking on the slot you want to use to connect it somewhere else in a second step, then to click the target as a third step. Yeah, so maybe some sort of way where you've got, I've got this thing that I want to paste, and maybe I can hold down a key and then actually just click on the pivot point that I want to select, or something like that. Or maybe this sort of subassembly is over here as a separate thing on the screen, and I can sort of rotate it separately and select bits on it. Maybe. Um, um, Someone's saying there's no X. I don't know what you mean. Someone's saying clicking would give more precise control. Yeah, potentially. Um, um, it does sort of have some other sort of implications for I did try clicking initially, but there were some other complications. I can't remember what they were now. Um, but I really like sort of this. I want to sort of keep the kind of most of the kind of functionality that we have at the moment. So when you're not creating loops, I really like you can just sort of highlight something and push C, like this. I can just click, highlight that and push C and copy it, and it just works like it used to, right? I think that's really nice and simple. I don't want to add more steps for things that work well already, right? When you don't have loops. So, I want to keep things that are simple at the moment. I want to keep them simple, right? Um, um, yeah, so someone's saying sort of maybe doing like a sort of like using the paint system, like this kind of selection. The problem with just sort of being able to select um, everything is like, I mean, it's okay with painting because it's just painting, right? But like often what will happen is you'll be sort of painting stuff and you'll accidentally select things behind it. So here I was just trying to select that, but then I accidentally selected things behind it, right? So with the selection system, that won't happen because it'll only select things that are actually connected to the sort of the selection. It won't just select things that are disconnected, right? Um, so you can imagine having a really complicated build with lots of layers. You don't want to sort of be accidentally selecting things. I think that would get pretty annoying. Whereas with painting, it's just painting, so it's not really a big deal. It's kind of fun to just be able to spray the paint everywhere. And it's easy to fix mistakes you made, right? Whereas selection, you want it to be a bit more precise. Yeah, so there's definitely some things to think about, and I want to hear more of your ideas. I think it'd be great to hear them in the Discord. So let me just read this one comment in the Discord. Sorry, I've read that one already. Okay, so I think I'll leave it at that. So I'm going to push the go live button just straight after the stream. So it'll be on the beta branch on Steam. So if you don't have access to the beta branch, it's really easy. You just right click on the game on Steam. You go properties, and then betas, and then there's a beta branch. You can opt into that, and then you'll get this change. I'm not going to put it on the main branch just yet because I want to get some testing on it. As far as performance goes, like if there's no loops, the performance should be the same as it was before. With loops, there's a slight performance impact, but I've done a lot of optimization, so I think it should be mostly fine. You shouldn't really notice it. I think, if you have something with like hundreds of loops in it, like mechanical loops with moving parts, you might sort of see a bit of a slowdown, but that's just the nature of the physics engine. But yeah, so have a play with it, and I am looking forward to hearing your ideas and what you think about it. So thank you for tuning into my stream, and thank you for supporting the game, and I'll see you all later. Thank you. Bye.